So let's take a look at the message of Daniel chapter 9. Many Christians in the Western world have grown up believing that the Bible teaches that there will be a literal 7-year period of intense tribulation before the return of Jesus. We have somehow accepted that during this proposed future period of tribulation, someone called the Antichrist will exert his influence over the earth and oppress the nation of Israel. Daniel 9 is a key passage used by futurists to come up with the idea of a 7-year period of tribulation in our future. However, any commentary written before 1880 will tell you that Daniel 9 is a prophecy about the coming Messiah. Matthew Henry, a very well-respected commentator, says that Daniel 9 is the clearest, brightest prophecy of the Messiah in all of the Old Testament. Daniel is informed concerning the redemption of the world by Jesus Christ, what should be the nature of it, and when it should be accomplished. This was the view held by the churches as a whole before John Nelson Darby came on the scene in the late 1800s. Let's turn there, Daniel chapter 9, and see what it says. In Daniel chapter 9 verses 3 through to 19, we can read about Daniel praying for his people, the Jews. Daniel prays, asking God to release Israel from captivity so they could return to their nation and their land. His prayer has to do with the people, the city, and the sanctuary. Daniel prays in the first year of King Cyrus's reign. While Daniel was praying, he has an angelic encounter. Gabriel appears to him, and Gabriel's response in Daniel 9 verses 20 to 27 is the answer to Daniel's prayer. In response to Daniel's prayer, Gabriel tells Daniel what would happen in Daniel's future. The same subjects that Daniel was praying about, the people, the city, and the sanctuary, are what occupy the prophecy which the angel Gabriel brings to Daniel in response to his prayer. So let's look at what Gabriel says in verse 24 to 27. Verse 24. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city, to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision, and to anoint the most holy. God's promise of 77s or 70 weeks, as it is accepted to mean, equals 490 years. This is because there are 7 days in a week, and 70 times 7 equals 490. And a study of the prophetic language of the time leads us to understand these as years. As Gabriel goes on to speak to Daniel, he divides these 490 years into 3 periods. 7 weeks, or 49 years, 62 weeks, or 434 years, 1 week, the last week, or 7 years. So Gabriel is prophesying about a period of 490 years, and he's saying that at the end of these 490 years, the prophecy of verse 24 will be fulfilled. Verse 25, no one understands this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. The Anointed One here refers to Jesus. Gabriel gives us a precise time here for the coming of the Messiah. He says that from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, there would be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, a total of 69 weeks or 483 years. A record of this decree given by Cyrus can be seen in 2 Chronicles 36, verses 22 and 23, and in Ezra 1, verses 1 to 4. with the decree going out in the year 536 BC, at which time nearly 50,000 Jews returned to their homeland with Zerubbabel as high priest. There are those who don't believe that the 70 weeks begin with Cyrus. They say that Chronicles and Ezra only talk about the rebuilding of the temple, not the city or the people. However, Isaiah 45:13 clearly states of Cyrus, "He," that's Cyrus, "will rebuild my city and let my exiles go free." Also, Isaiah 44:28, when talking of Cyrus, says, "He is my shepherd, and he shall fulfill all my purpose, saying of Jerusalem, she shall be built, and of your temple your foundation shall be laid." Not only this, but for the Jews, the city, the temple, and people are inextricably linked. Ezra and Chronicles simply don't give the full context of the decree. Also, compelling evidence is recorded by Josephus, the Jewish historian, in a copy of a letter written by Cyrus to the governors that were in Syria. This is what that letter of Cyrus says. "I have given leave to as many of the Jews that dwell in my country as please to do so, to return to their own country and to rebuild their city, and to rebuild the temple of God at Jerusalem on the same place where it was before." Looking back on time from 2,500 years later, the dates from the giving of the decree to the time of Christ don't entirely add up with the knowledge that we currently have. But it should be noted that there is some argument about the dating of the Persian Empire. The reality is that an accurate and complete chronology exists from the conquest of Persia by Alexander the Great down to the present time. However, in regards to the period from Cyrus to Alexander during the period of the Persian Empire, there is some uncertainty with the knowledge we currently have. In the terms of why the 69 weeks is divided into 77s and 62 sevens, it's believed that the first 7 relates to the period of time it actually took to rebuild Jerusalem. In verse 26, it says, "After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed." In verse 26, we are now in what's called Daniel's 70th week. Again, we have reference to the anointed one, to Jesus. Here we are told that Jesus will be cut off. He will be put to death. And it says that then the enemy would come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. If you know your history or you've been listening to my previous messages, you will know that this destruction of the city of Jerusalem and of the Jewish temple happened in AD 70. The people of the ruler came and destroyed both. The people of the ruler being the Roman army, with the ruler being Rome. Gabriel then makes reference to the overwhelming judgments, the desolations which were to fall upon the city, the sanctuary, and the people in consequence of their rejection and crucifixion of Christ. It also makes reference to this destruction being the end of the Old Covenant. And I talk more about this in my message on end times, which is in this series. Moving on to verse 27. "He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that it is decreed is poured out upon him." This verse repeats and elaborates the content of verse 26, a term which is known as synonymous parallelism. Verse 27, which also talks about Daniel's 70th week, is one in which futurists would say talks of the Antichrist, but this could not be further from the truth. And I encourage you to watch my messages on the Antichrist, which is in this series, to find out what the Bible says about Antichrist. The Messiah is the main subject of verses 25 and 26 in this chapter. And therefore it is most natural to conclude that the he referred to in this next verse, in verse 27, is Messiah also. We only need to consider who it was that put an end to the need for the high priest to make sacrifices for sins to know this. When Jesus died on the cross, he became the sacrifice for the sins of the world. A sacrifice once and for all, according to Hebrews 7, verse 27. From this point on, no further sacrifice was needed. An end was put to the old covenant and a new covenant was established. Jesus himself put an end to sacrifice and offering. Futurists tell us that an Antichrist will come and stop the Jews from making sacrifices in a yet-to-be-built third temple. But this would be a good thing if it was to happen, not a bad thing. For Jews or anyone to continue to make or to start making sacrifices to God for sin will be to deny the one who was the ultimate sacrifice, would be to deny Jesus Christ. You know, one of the things I love about the Son of God movie was the contrasts. If you haven't seen it, the producers jumped between the scene of Jesus being put on the cross and the temple where the high priest was just beginning to accept the sacrifice from the people for their sins at the time of Passover. What you see in this movie is the people bringing their lambs for atonement of sin and totally missing what was happening at the same time, that Jesus was offering himself on the cross for the sins of the world, and that Jesus had put an end to the need for continual offerings. I just want to note here that the New Living Translation totally interprets verse 27 from a futurist point of view, and interprets it in a way that you couldn't identify the he as Jesus. But you should know that it is the only version that does that. There is a reason other versions don't read this way, and that is because this verse does not say what the New Living Translation makes it say. Getting back to Daniel 9 as a whole, I'd just like to make a few further comments. Number 1, the goal of Daniel's 70 weeks is clearly stated in Daniel 9:24. To finish the transgression, to put an end to sin and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. This was achieved at the first coming of Jesus Christ. Secondly, I'd just like to say that there is no gap of thousands of years between Daniel's 69th week and the 70th week, as futurists would have us believe. In other places where prophecy specifies a certain time, like in Genesis 15:13, Numbers 14:34, if it says a certain number of weeks or years, it means that certain number of continuous weeks or years. Also, Jeremiah's 70 years, on which the pattern of Daniel's 70 weeks was constructed, shows no gap. Neither is there a gap between the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks in Daniel 9, making it unlikely there would be a gap between the 69th and 70th weeks. More than that though, this prophecy was fulfilled quite clearly in Jesus Christ at his first coming. The 70th week has already occurred. This understanding has been the understanding of the historic church as a whole. Take Augustine, for example. Augustine says this: "For let us not suppose that the computation of Daniel's weeks was interfered with, or that they were not complete, but had to be completed afterward in the end of all things. For Luke most plainly testifies that the prophecy of Daniel was accomplished at the time when Jerusalem was overthrown." Thirdly, as regards Jesus confirming a covenant with many for 1:7, there was 7 years of favour for the Jews beginning in AD 27 when Jesus began his public ministry. Jesus announced this when he read the scroll of Isaiah in the synagogue at the beginning of his ministry. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." At the middle of the 3.5 years, in the middle of the week, Jesus gave his own life on the cross, making an end to sacrifice and offering. A new covenant was established. For another 3.5 years after Jesus' death, the gospel was preached virtually exclusively to the Jew. Then God spoke to Peter and Paul in AD 33, telling them that they were to take the gospel to the Gentiles. The end of 490 years marked a significant paradigm shift. Now the gospel is for everyone. 7 years of favour for the Jews, 3.5 years when Jesus walked among them, 3.5 years in which the disciples preached the good news to the Jews. The Jews received the greatest favour ever extended to humanity in being the first ones to receive the good news of Jesus Christ, the fulfilment of Daniel's prophecy. At the end of AD 33, despite Jesus coming to set aside the old covenant and establishing the new covenant as it tells us in Hebrews 10:9, unbelieving Jews decisively chose the old covenant and rejected Jesus as Messiah. Jonathon Welton points out how we have in Daniel a 5-part prophecy of the Messiah and the events surrounding the introduction of the new covenant. Firstly, it tells the year of the Messiah's arrival. Secondly, Daniel 9 tells of Messiah's death. Daniel 9 tells of the end of the old covenant. It tells of the confirming of the new covenant, and it tells of the destruction of Jerusalem. Daniel 9 says nothing about a 7-year period of tribulation, a rebuilt Jewish temple, or any Antichrist. Daniel's prophecy of 70 weeks found in Daniel chapter 9 was referring to Christ and was completed by Christ at his first coming. It was fulfilled by Jesus Christ in the 1st century AD.